Hi guys, welcome to another podcast. So we're going to continue with a series of why New Zealand so far ahead of South Africa in rugby. And obviously we're going to be looking at it from an international perspective. So prior to 1992, we actually had a winning record against New Zealand. And since 92, we've had a 26% winning record. And sometimes it just feels like the gap's getting bigger. Now, what we've done is we've studied junior structures and senior elite structures, and obviously what we're going to be looking at it is from a South African and New Zealand international perspective, as I mentioned it before. So in terms of the head-to-head, you can see in the early days South Africa was quite dominant, and New Zealand came back with some great teams in the 50s and 60s. And then we have the 1970s where South Africa were pretty dominant. In the 1980s, we had the 1981 series, the Flower Bomb series, so to speak. Great rugby played by both teams. South Africa narrowly lost. But you can see the average score is 18-17 in favour of South Africa, even though we lost the series 1-2, which just shows you how tight it was. Great rivalry we had back in those days. And then, obviously, since the return to international sport, we've just been going downhill. If you look, I haven't included the last New Zealand game in this one because I did this presentation a while back. Been very busy with work, so I haven't been able to, get a lot of time to do some more presentations. So just take that into consideration. So 2010s would probably be up to about 15-16% if that is considered. But take a look at the gaps in terms of the scores. I mean, we've got a 5-point gap in the 90s, a 7-point gap in the 2000s, and then a 15-point gap in the 2010s. So it is quite significant. And then we take a look at World Cups. New Zealand won in 87 and 91 they came third. We didn't play in the first two World Cups. First World Cup we played in, obviously that famous victory over New Zealand, 15-12 in the final. Then 99 we came third, New Zealand came fourth. 2003 New Zealand knocked us out of the quarterfinals and finished third. 2007 New Zealand were knocked out of the quarterfinals and we were the winners. And in 2011, 2015, New Zealand won both World Cups. South Africa got knocked out of the quarterfinals by Australia in 2011, thanks Bryce Lawrence. And in 2015, we had a very narrow loss against New Zealand. I think the score was 2018. So in terms of head-to-head in World Cups, we've played each other 4 times and each team's won twice. And I think if there's any team that can give New Zealand a good run for their money in a World Cup, obviously it is South Africa. Now, obviously, I think if we were playing in the 1991 World Cup, I don't think we would have won. I don't think we had the quality, but I think in 1987 we would have won hands down. I think we would have easily won that World Cup. Now, if we take a look at hypothetical 87 teams, now a lot of New Zealanders have said to me the Cavaliers tour of the year before in 1986 was full of old men and, really not great players and all the rest. However, all the guys that are highlighted in bold and italics were part of that Cavaliers tour to South Africa the year before, and they were well beaten by the Springboks. It wasn't even close. And if you take a look at the Springboks that are in bold, those can go down as probably some of the best Springbok players we've ever had. I mean, I think Carl du Plessis, Donnie Gerber, Nas Boert, and Louis Schmidt are probably the best in the history of our game in their positions, or there's an argument for it at least. Now, look, New Zealand had great players. I mean, they had John Kerwin, who's one of the best wings I've ever seen. Grant Fox, fantastic fly-off. Shalford was amazing. Michael Jones was amazing. Sean Fitzpatrick was fantastic as well, but he was still in the early days over here. And I just think in terms of quality, there was just too much quality in this Springbok team for this All-Black team in a 1987 World Cup. So, look, it's my honest belief that I think South Africa would have won that first World Cup. The second one, I don't think we really had a chance to win that. I mean, that showed in 1992 when we lost to New Zealand and we were very well beaten by Australia in 1992. So the difference in quality between the 87 team and the 91 team would have been quite significant. But look, there's a lot of players in the South African team that aren't highlighted in bold that were absolutely world class. I mean, Jaco Reinach was one of the fastest wings you'd ever see. Michael du Plessis was a beast of a centre. And look at that loose forward trio. I mean, you had Jannie Brett, Gert Smal, and Val Bartman, absolutely dominant. Louis Moelman, one of the biggest locks you'd have seen in those days. Skalk Burger, an absolute legend. And then Flippy van der Merwe, beast of a prop. Frans Erasmus, they called him Domkrach. I mean, this guy was an absolute beast. So I think there would have been too much quality in this 87 South African team for New Zealand. I think in that sense we probably would have had a a 3-3 World Cup record between the two of us. It's weird. I sort of see us upping our games in World Cups and dropping our games outside of World Cup years, besides the game against Japan. I mean, I know a lot of Kiwis and Aussies like to throw that in my face when we're in a pub. Yes, we lost to Japan. And can you believe they're making a bloody movie out of that? They're actually making a movie out of that. So we go from Invictus, an inspiring story, to becoming the butt of a joke, basically, you know. So anyway, yeah, I really do believe the 87 World Cup would have been won by South Africa. Now, in terms of the head-to-head thoughts, look, if it's only about talent, then the logical conclusion would be that South Africa and New Zealand would still be in the top two. The reality is we've slipped so low that we've lost to Argentina, Japan, and Italy. And I mean, the head-to-head shows generational gaps, but generally the rivalry remained intact. And there's a gradual decline, and the decline continues today. And we see the decline in the South African system working like this. Basically, from under 20 level, we compete very well against New Zealand, and then elite level, we start to lose it a bit, and then international level, we completely lose it. Whereas in New Zealand, it's a reverse. In the international rugby, since the professional era, they've got a 72% win rate against us. In elite rugby, they've got a 60% win rate against us, and under 20 rugby, they've got a 20% win rate against us. So it's a complete reverse. So we're producing fantastic youth players that somehow lose the way slightly in elite rugby and then completely lose the plot at international rugby. Whereas in New Zealand, it's exactly the opposite. And look, in terms of the current squads, it's sometimes fair enough to say that, look, perhaps sometimes players mature late and aren't identified at school under 20 level. Well, in our current squad, 62% have played international schools and under 20 rugby. The New Zealand squad is 82%. Now, what about leadership at international level? Now, before we look at leadership, I want to just take a look at how the game's structured, and I also want to take a look at culture and what role culture plays. So, in terms of the structure, the way I interpret it, guys, is that the New Zealand Union dictates to franchises, the franchises dictate to the provinces, and the provinces dictate to the clubs, all in the betterment of the international team. When South Africa, what I see is clubs basically going to union presidents and saying to them, well, you know, what are you going to do for me in order to get the vote? And then the provinces basically doing the same thing, and by extensions, the franchises doing the same thing to SARU. What are you going to give me in order for me to give you the vote? What do I get out of it? I don't see that culture in New Zealand. I see that culture a lot in South Africa. Now, what impact does this sort of structure have? So let's take a look at leadership. So we start off with New Zealand, Steve Chu. He's the CEO of New Zealand Rugby. He's got a master's degree in recreation administration. He's Secretary General New Zealand University Sports Union, and he's been a member of the New Zealand Rugby Union since 2001. He was CEO of Crusaders, most successful Super Rugby team of all time. He's been CEO of the union since 2008, New Zealand Rugby Union, and he guided them through near bankruptcy due to the recession and still successfully bid for the 2011 World Cup. Then we got Nikki Nicol. She's the Chief Operating Officer. She qualified as a Chartered Accountant from the University of Auckland. She got a Bachelor of Commerce from the same university. She held senior executive roles at BP in New Zealand, UK, and Australia. Now, she started off as the Chief Financial Officer, and she was eventually given more responsibility, and now she's obviously the COO. Then the President, we got Maurice Trapp. Don't really have any information on his qualifications, but I mean, he's been a financial advisor since 1980. But take a look at that head coach record as head coach of Auckland: 93 games played and 3 losses. He's also been chairman of the New Zealand Rugby Foundation since '96, chairman of the Ginger Financial Group, and also owner of Maurice Trapp Group, which is a consulting business. And then he was president of the Auckland Rugby Union before becoming president of the New Zealand Rugby Union. And then we've got Bill Osborne. He was an All Black, got an MBA with distinction from Waikato University. He was a group manager for New Zealand Post. He was CEO of Quotable Value New Zealand, chairman of 2 Degrees Mobile, chairman of CoreLogic. He's a member of the Maori Sports Board and a member of the Sports Foundation. Now, he did look, I searched everywhere for corruption on these New Zealand guys. I searched absolutely everywhere where I could, and I found a little bit on this guy. So he had some issues with credit card spending while he was CEO of Quotable Value New Zealand. But this wouldn't even make newspaper headlines in South Africa. I think they were giving him a lot of grief because he spent like $50 or $60 at a Hooters. And I mean, if I found out someone in South Africa was only spending $50 or $60 at a Hooters on their their state-sponsored credit card or whatever, I would consider that very impressive. That's how low my standard is. And then we move on to South African leadership. We got Yuri Roo, the CEO. He's got everything you can think of: BCom, BBA, LLB, and MBA. He's vice president of the Western Province Union, chairman of the Stellenbosch Rugby Club, team manager of South African students, and he was director of finance and asset management at the University of Stellenbosch, and he was also chairman of Africa Sun Media. Now, he was accused of embezzling 35 million rand worth of funds, and no action's been taken. Now, the issue has risen in 2013, and it won't see the courts until 2019. And as CEO, when Saru apparently made a great profit, he gave himself a bonus increase of 107%. It was only him and the CFO at the time that awarded bonuses. So he's dodgy. Make no mistake, this guy is dodgy. And I've been researching a lot about New Zealand, South African culture. All right. I think if these allegations were made against a New Zealander, I think he would have resigned from his post. I don't believe he would have stayed there. And I don't believe, by any stretch of the imagination, that it wouldn't see the courts 6 or 7 years later. I mean, that's a bunch of shit right there. And then the CFO of South African Rugby, we got Bobi Saban. He qualified as a CA in 2001. He was BP, South Africa's Risk and Assurance Manager. He started his own consultancy company in 2006. He was CFO for the SA Institute for Drug-Free Sport, but besides that, not much information available, but from what I've read, a pretty competent guy. And then we get to a real beauty, Mark Alexander, the president. And if you take a look at this from the SASCOC website, right, the South African Olympic website, this is everything there is on him. He has extensive experience in South African Olympic sport and has served in various positions since 1995. Was Deputy President of the South African Rugby Union and now President of SARU since 2016. SASCOC board member for the past cycle. Now, you might turn around and say, look, the SASCOC website is probably pretty shitty and doesn't have a lot of information about any of its members. Well, you'd be wrong. Take a look at Gideon Sam. I mean, as I laugh every time I see this picture. It's hard out here for a pimp, eh? Look at that guy. Absolutely styling. I mean, anything you want to find on Gideon Sam, you can find on Gideon Sam on this website. I mean, look at it. Everything is available. Proudly South African. He's president of Swimming South Africa, Springbok manager, all sorts of stuff. Everything's available. But Mark Alexander has got about 4 sentences available on him. I got some information from Graham Joffe. He's an investigative reporter. And to say that this guy's got a dodgy past is an understatement. He's one of 2 members to vote no on Tubby Reddy and 2 others members' dismissal. Now, Tubby Reddy was head of SASCOC and found guilty of sexual harassment and misappropriation of funds. So he voted no on that, one of the few. And in 2010, there was a bid from Megapro for a contract with SARU. And these guys won with no tender process. Then it turned out that Megapro was owned by Primedia. It turns out Primedia bribed Alexander with a 500,000 Rand a year salary. And he's also been a director of 7 companies that have gone insolvent. So with this really shitty and spotty record, he's still elected unopposed in 2016. And here's some images of those payments that Graham Joffe managed to get hold of. So very dirty Mark Alexander. And then we've got an absolute beauty. Take a look at this guy, Francois Davids, our vice president, our esteemed vice president. He started as a traffic cop, and then he became president of the Boland Rugby Union. And then it turns out that Boland rugby players were renting property owned by him, and they were being paid by SARU through the lottery fund. So he had a whole bunch of property, rented them at inflated prices to to players in his union, and getting paid through by the South African Rugby Union through the lottery fund. I mean, this is crazy. If that's not enough to show you that corruption is a genetic thing, his brother was suspended for faking his coaching qualifications, and he had to leave the union. And at a recent Craven Week speech, and I don't think they're going to be asking Francois Davies to make a speech anytime soon, he had two buttes. The first one he said was, well done to the South African rugby team on their recent series win against Ireland. Only problem was, it was England. And then the next one, well done to the South African Sevens team on the SABC Cup victory. It was HSBC Cup victory. SABC is a television station, the South African Broadcasting Corporation. Now, if I take a look at the leadership in New Zealand and I compare that to the leadership in South Africa, it just seems like a really bad cartoon, doesn't it? Kind of reminds me of something like this. There we've got our Shrek with his Mrs. Our esteemed sports minister who loves calling people racist without any proof. I mean, look at Francois Davies. I mean, doesn't he not suit donkey? And then, of course, and South Africans will know what I mean by this, we got Yuri Roo, Puss in Boots. Anyway, I'm a big fan of Rassie Erasmus, and I'd hate to bring it up, but you got to bring up whatever becomes available in terms of news and something that is credible. And basically, Joffrey asserted that Rassie didn't apply for his job, but he was rather offered it. And he was offered a 6-year contract covering 2 World Cups, which is completely unprecedented. The contract was negotiated by Frikkie Erasmus. Now, Frikkie Erasmus is Rassie Erasmus' personal lawyer and his business partner. Frikkie Erasmus is also the Saru lawyer. Conflict of interest right over there. Turns out, Rassie's also got an IT company. And it too has a contract with Saru. And then Yuri Roo, Frikkie Erasmus, and Rassie Erasmus have a supplement company called Bokpulse, the sole supplier to the Springbok rugby squad. So Rassie is now director of rugby, he's a coach, an IT provider, and a supplement provider to the Boks. There's no doubting his ability. I think he's a fantastic coach, but this is just a little bit suspect. And I think since we're comparing ourselves to New Zealand, I don't think something like this would happen in New Zealand. I just don't think so. Now, in terms of the differences, the way I see it, South Africa is a poor country, New Zealand's a rich country. There are not a lot of opportunities for enrichment in South Africa, and I do believe rugby is used as a tool for enrichment, when it shouldn't be. What I see in New Zealand is a mentality, how can we serve New Zealand rugby? What I see in South Africa is a mentality, how can South African rugby serve us? Now, earlier I talked about culture. So what I basically did was I took a look at Hofstede's cultural dimensions. Now, if you guys want to press pause quickly and, just go on Google quickly and take a look at Hofstede's cultural dimensions, you can read more into this if you're interested in it. But just in terms of a quick summary, what the results showed to me was, first, we have to understand its generalizations, okay? The second to understand is that we're more likely to find comfort working within our cultural parameters than attempting to change them. Now, what the New Zealand cultural parameters showed was that working together and discussion are encouraged, and there's no room for authoritarian figures. They're looking to share, to learn. In terms of South African cultural parameters, it shows authority and seniority is respected, and outside ideas are tolerated, but they're not encouraged. Now, in terms of the nature of hierarchy, the pursuit of any activity of value is automatically going to create a hierarchy. I'm not saying South African culture is wrong, it's different. In this sort of hierarchy, you have to have competent people in charge. You need to ensure systems in place that prevent bad leadership. Look, you get good dictatorships and bad dictatorships. I mean, Mussolini and Mugabe and Hitler are an example of bad dictatorships. Good dictatorships are like Alexander the Great or Lee Kuan Yew, who basically built Singapore into a first world country. If an extremely competent person is autocratic, quick and decisive decisions can be made. And the further point is that subordinates are far more likely to follow instructions, so actually easier for the hierarchy to be maintained. But when leadership changes, there's a huge risk of the entire hierarchy crumbling. If the leadership is weak or incompetent, that's when the rot begins. If we take a look at it in the South African context, okay, considering everything I've just said, let's start off with Donnie Craven. He was president of SARU from 56 to 93. He was considered a Springbok great. He was a player, a national coach, an academic, an administrator, and author. He had a 74% win record as a coach. He was a 3-time chairman of the IRB, had doctorates in ethology, psychology, and physical education. and he created the physical training division of the South African Defence Force and became the first professor of physical education at Stellenbosch University. Autocratic and impressive. Then we got Louis Late. He was a lock for Free State. He was a captain. He built a fertilizer empire, became extremely wealthy, and then he was elected president of a bankrupt Transvaal, which is known as the Lions now, in 1984. This guy managed to wipe out all their debts by 1993, and Transvaal won their first Currie Cup in 21 years. And he became a successor to Donnie Craven. He won the bid for the 95 World Cup, and South Africa won the trophy. Walked away from rugby to become a politician, and in 1999 became a member of parliament. Now, it must be noted that there was allegations of mismanagement and racism against him. He vehemently denied them. There was no proof of this. But again, what you have over here is a strong, effective, autocratic leader with a good background, right? It's a great background in sport and business. And then 1998 to 2004, we had Silas Nkanunu. He was a human rights lawyer during the apartheid era, became president of the Eastern Province Rugby Union in 1994, and as part of the SAFU executive. He was elected in 1998 after Louis Late left, like I said. He was the first black president, and after deciding to leave rugby administration, not much more information on him, but seems like he's had more than a few legal issues to deal with. Now, the thing with Nkanunu was that he was not an autocratic type leader in his management style, but he was seen as very weak and ineffective. He was very quiet spoken, didn't like to rock the boat, and I think a lot of people took advantage of that. And then we had Brian van Rooyen, elected in 2004. He became a millionaire through association with the world's largest black-owned consulting firm, which is Bud Anderson. He was president of a local club and took on Louis Late for control of the Lions in 1996. He won 3 out of 55 votes, just to show you how much power Louis Late had at Transvaal at the time. And he became vice president of the Lions before becoming the head of SARU. And after he was kicked out of SARU, he was found guilty on 6 charges of mismanagement and corruption, and he was banned from serving as a SARU administrator for life. And funny thing as well, he actually tried to get Robbie Fleck extradited from the UK for calling him a clown. So, when Robbie Fleck was playing rugby for Bath, I think it was, in an interview he said Brian van Rooyen was a complete clown. And van Rooyen later charged with the British police and demanded that he be extradited to South Africa. It just shows you what a flippin' clown this guy is. Then 2006 to 2016, we had Oregon Hoskins. Now, Hoskins was a high school dropout, worked in politics, but then went back to school, matriculated at the age of 20, and went on to earn a degree. He became a teacher and a rugby coach. Later on, he qualified as an attorney, and he served as Natal president before he was elected as SARU president. Very autocratic leader, definitely a very strong leader. You could see it in his demeanor, but not even close to being an effective leader. He was actually a really, really shit president. And Mark Alexander as well. I mean, I've said enough about Shrek. I don't need to say much more about him. But as soon as you look at Donnie Craven and Louis Late, and those guys walk away, basically what you're left with is guys that might have either that they didn't have the autocratic and strong personality to lead in terms of the South African cultural parameters, as Silas Nkanunu, for example, or they had those autocratic tendencies, but they didn't have the competency, like Van Rooyen, Oregon Hoskins, and Mark Alexander. Now, if we had strong leadership, I really do believe that we should have retained Jake White from 2007 to 2011, and Alex Coetzee should have basically been the assistant. Then from 2011 to 2015, Coetzee should have taken over with Hanneke Meyer as assistant coach, and then 2015 to 2019, in terms of a contract, it should have been Hanneke Meyer as Russie's assistant coach. Continuity is always the key, and New Zealand rugby for a long time had a problem with continuity, but since Graham Henry, they've been absolutely dominant, and I think they'll continue like that. I believe that someone like Scott Robinson, for example, will eventually be brought in to New Zealand rugby, and I believe that he'll be brought in as a assistant coach to start, and then he'll move up and take over from someone like Steve Hansen or one of Steve Hansen's assistants. Now, I see a plan in New Zealand rugby, which I don't see in terms of South African rugby. So just in terms of my final thoughts, the biggest factors where I've seen New Zealand ahead so far in the series is player development, definitely massively on the coaching. I see problems in union management from a South African perspective, and I see problems in upper management, as we've clearly shown here. But perhaps one of the biggest and most controversial topics is politics. Something South Africa has to contend with and New Zealand doesn't. And that, gentlemen and the few ladies that are watching, is going to be the discussion for the next podcast. Anyway, guys, thanks again for watching. As always, I'll try and get these videos out a bit more often. Obviously, work takes first preference. But yeah, feels good to be back. And don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And have a fantastic week further. And let's hope the Springboks can surprise us again this weekend.